So welcome everyone. My name is Jessie Stahl and I am the Senior Policy and Program Coordinator at PlantPure Communities. And I am joining in today from Wilmington, North Carolina. We are delighted to have you all here for the webinar, The Link Between Nutrition and Bone Health with plant-based orthopedist, Dr. Ted Weisman. Before we jump in, I would like to give you some background information on Dr. Weisman. Dr. Ted Weisman is a board-certified orthopedic surgeon. He is a physician partner at Connecticut Orthopedics, one of the largest and most prestigious physician-run orthopedic surgery groups in the Northeast, and attending orthopedic surgeon on the medical staff of Yale New Haven Health System. He was chairman of the Department of Orthopedic Surgery at Milford Hospital in Milford, Connecticut from 2005 to 2019. He served a two-year term as president of the Milford Hospital medical staff from 2008 to 2010. And prior to moving to Connecticut, Dr. Weisman resided in New York, where he served as assistant clinical professor in the Department of Orthopedic Surgery at New York Medical College. He was chief of hand surgery at St. Agnes Hospital in White Plains, New York. He founded Orthopedic Health, LLC in 2003 and was its managing director from 2003 through its successful merger with Connecticut Orthopedic Specialists in 2013. And now, before we hand things over to Jody, I would like to let the rest of the PPC staff briefly introduce themselves.
Thank you, Jessie. Hi, everyone. My name is Ella Stevens, and I am the Pod Support Programs Manager at PlantPure Communities. And thank you for joining us today.
Hello, I am Caroline Dyer, and I am the Vice President for PlantPure Communities located in Durham, North Carolina, and welcome.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Jody Cass. I'm the Executive Director of PlantPure Communities. Welcome from far and wide. This is part of a global Jumpstart effort, and we have some people from all over the world. So we really are, in fact, quite global. So welcome to everybody. I want to just take a moment, and some folks are new to PlantPure Communities, and take a moment and explain who we are. We are a 501c3 nonprofit organization created by Nelson Campbell, Nelson also made the film PlantPure Nation. That came out in 2015. It was on Netflix for a while. And actually, PlantPure Communities was created as a result of that film. That film captured the story of Dr. T. Colin Campbell, that's Nelson's dad, who's a very famous nutrition researcher who has a book, the China Study, that many of you may have heard of. And in that film, the PlantPure Nation, Nelson was able to depict what happens in terms of trying to get the word out about this really important nutrition research. And at the end of that film, there's a call to action for people to join the POD network, and that is the backbone of the grassroots movement that PlantPure Communities is leading. Anyway, so PlantPure Communities does many different things, and if you want more information, you can go on our website. We have a very, very full website. But one of the great things that we're doing right now is the Global Jumpstart program, which this is part of that. Today's webinar is the first day in the countdown towards our Global Jumpstart, which kicks off on Sunday at 1 o'clock with a discussion with Nelson Campbell, and folks can sign up for that at any time that they'd like until I think it's Friday. We're going to be closing down registration. We also have two other global Jumpstarts that are in the works. The next one will be in August. We haven't settled on the date yet, and that one will be focusing on the health disparities that were laid bare by the COVID-19 pandemic. Just a tiny bit more history on the Global Jumpstart. We decided to create the Global Jumpstart largely as a result of two very important commentaries written by Dr. Campbell, where he was able to talk about things that we all can do to help reduce the risks of hospitalization and fatalities through nutrition if we are infected by COVID-19. Really important articles. I think they'll probably post them in the chat and in the Facebook page. But if you haven't seen them, definitely go to our website and check those out. They're really, really important, as we're going to be in this pandemic, it seems, for quite a while. The other bit of context to give you is, I guess I met Dr. Weisman several years ago. We have a lot of people in common, including his sister, who it sounds like is listening. Hi, Ellen. That was a coincidence. And I think Dr. Weisman may be the only plant-based orthopedist. I know he's the only one I've ever met, but if he's not the only, he's one of the few. And so when we decided to launch our Ditch Dairy campaign at PlantPure Communities, we asked Dr. Weisman to help us, and he was very, very helpful in crafting this article. We just released it, and that's why the timing of this webinar works out beautifully. We see on the screen here, there's a photo from the article. You'll see that's Dr. T. Colin Campbell, and doing his morning run. I think he's now 86, I think now. Yeah, it's a great article, and that's kind of be a lot of the context of our conversation today. And so if you don't have to take notes and everything that's being said, you can go and take a look at that article. The other thing, just quickly tell you the plan for the webinar. I'm going to interview Dr. Weisman once we get through the intros, and then we'll do a Q&A. The staff will be pulling stuff from the chat and the Facebook Live, and then we'll have a few just closing remarks with some reminders. So I'm going to get started now on the interview, but before I do, I know that you all heard Dr. Weisman's bio. But what you don't know is that you probably can figure this out, he's really smart, and he's also a really, really nice guy. And so we're just thrilled to have him today, and we're really quite lucky to have him today, and to have him talk about such an important information with so many myths around dairy, and also to get some really important questions answered. So with that, welcome, Dr. Ted Weisman. Hello, Ted.
Hi. Hello.
Hi, okay. You're unmuted. Great, we're in good shape.
That's good to know. Good.
So the first question I have for you, you're an orthopedic surgeon. You follow and you advocate plant-based dietary lifestyle. Can you tell us about your profession? What does it mean to be an orthopedic surgeon? And what has been your journey to becoming plant-based?
Okay. Well, I want to thank you for having me. It's a great privilege. I mean, the doctors you mentioned, obviously Dr. Colin Campbell wrote the China study. Has been instrumental in teaching the public about plant-based health. And there's been so many brilliant physicians who are involved with that. And the fact that my name even comes next to them is quite something for me. For example, we have Dr. Michael Clapper, who has a whole initiative now for moving medicine forward to teach med students about nutrition. Dr. Dean Ornish, Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn. I can go on and on. I know that's not the crux of the talk here, but I have to give kudos to these physicians whose shoulders I stand on. And Jody, people don't know this about you, but if they read the intro in the PlantPure Communities site, they'll know that you really do build, I think it says something like building a lifelong commitment to working for the public good. And I know you've done that with your initiatives in public housing and another aspect of your life. And I think people should know that. That's quite a feat. Now, back to orthopedics. What is orthopedics? Well, most people know, but just in case you don't, an orthopedic surgeon or orthopedist deals with bones, muscles, joints, ligaments, tendon, injuries, and arthritis from we'll say the top of the neck to the little toe, everything in the body. And it's a big call. It's a lot to do, and there's a lot of subspecialties to it. And I will tell you that I may be a unicorn. There may not be a lot of orthopedic surgeons, or any, I don't know the answer, I haven't taken a poll, who live the dietary lifestyle or advocate for it as I do. But I will tell you, one other thing about orthopedics you should know is the advancements, like in all fields of medicine, is incredible. For example, a child who used to be lay in bed for 8 weeks with a shin bone fracture, it's called a tibia fracture, Back even in the 1960s and even into the 1970s, laying up in traction is now treated with a tiny incision. They're up on crutches the next day. Total hip replacements. One day you can be back home. So there are great advancements in orthopedics. However, and this is the big however, the one thing we have to realize is it's not just a knee, it's not just a hip, and it's not just a wrist that walks into our office. In fact, I had a patient one time come to me with fresh stitches in her arm after surgery by another doctor. I said, "Why are you here? He just operated on you." And her line, which I'll never forget, the quote said, "I think he forgot that there's a person attached to the wrist." Well, that may be about his bedside manner, but it's also about the fact that we have to look at the whole person. And what I've been seeing over the last few years is that people are getting more obese and sicker, and I just can't explain it. And I will tell you that, well, I can explain it. I can explain it by the American diet, what we call the Standard American Diet, or the SAD. That's what it stands for. And that's what prompted me to get involved and to look what's going on here. Is there a better way? Orthopedic surgery is great, but there's got to be something besides that that we can do to help our patients. So that, in short, is the way I got involved. And as I said, Dr. Clapper, who's doing the Moving Medicine Forward initiative, because he's getting at the grassroots, teaching young doctors, med students, that the body is a healing machine and we should learn about nutrition. So I hope that answers the question of how I got to where I am now.
Yeah, that's great. And I'm so glad you mentioned Dr. Clapper and the Moving Medicine Forward initiative. PlantPure Communities is collaborating with Dr. Clapper on that initiative. And we actually had a really important announcement last night. I was going to mention it in the closing remarks, but we opened registration for that. It's a 12 session masterclass that's going to run starting on July 12th and end in December. And it's particularly focused on medical students and doctors and nurses and healthcare professionals, but really anyone who's interested in diving a little deeper can benefit from it. So I'd recommend everybody take a look at that if they're interested. It's really an incredible thing to be working with Dr. Clapper. Anyway, okay, next question for Dr. Weisman. Many doctors recommend drinking milk and eating foods such as cheese and yogurt to support bone health. But you're quoted in the article, cows are no better at making vitamin D than we are. Vitamin D is added in the processing of milk after its extraction from the cow. In other words, cow's milk, soy milk, and almond milk are all fortified with vitamin D. Is that why you don't recommend these dairy products?
Well, let's put it this way. Cow's milk, like almond milk and soy milk, are simply delivery systems for calcium. Okay, we don't make calcium. Cows don't make calcium. They get calcium from the plants and the grass they eat. So the cow is basically the middleman, if you will. What I will tell you is there's enough, if you will, sorry to say this to the farmers, but there's enough bad things in milk, which is the reason that I advocate against it. In fact, in speaking with Dr. Campbell, since we've discussed Dr. Campbell already, on the phone over a year ago, he said it's one of the worst foods you can eat for your health. I'm paraphrasing, but at the end of the conversation, he said, and you should know, I grew up on a dairy farm. So if anyone knows, Dr. Campbell knows. And I will tell you also that Dr. Walter Willett, who is the chief of nutrition at Harvard University and is a top researcher in this field, says there is no nutritional requirement for dairy. In fact, most of the world doesn't even consume dairy foods. Interestingly, just not long ago, before COVID, but not before we stayed home and didn't socialize much or at all, I was out with some people and the woman said, I need my calcium, so I'm going to eat my cheese pizza. And again, that's a delivery system for the calcium. But what she didn't know is what's in that cheese that comes from the milk, that comes from the cow, that I'm going to get into a little bit, is not the best delivery system for it. So I'm not here, as my kids used to say, to yuck your yum, but I do want to tell you that it's important to know facts, because all I'm interested is in the facts. And what I have found through the years of talking to people about nutrition is that there are two groups of people. Those that don't really care, and may say, I only live once, this is what I'm going to eat, I'll take a pill, to help me digest or to help my blood pressure. And that's one group of people. The other group of people are listening to this webinar, because the bottom line is, if you're interested, you're probably here. But what I'm saying is there are another group of people who are interested in their health. They do want to do the best for their health. And that's another reason I'm here. So let's use some common sense. And I'm going to talk about dairy and the reasons why I think it's a bad delivery system for calcium and vitamin D. As you mentioned in your question, yes, calcium and vitamin D are fortified in milk. Or another way to say it is milk is fortified with those things that you need for bone health. Vitamin D, which I'll talk about in a little while, is needed for digestion of calcium in the intestines. And calcium is needed for the mineralization and the strength of our bones. That's the short form, but that's really all you need to know for the information that I'd like to present. I mean, we can get into the details, but that's important.
That's great.
But, yeah.
So let me, before we get in, I know we're going to dive into a bunch of these things, and especially where those myths are around calcium and vitamin D, but let me ask you a question that kind of goes even to some of the stuff we said earlier about policy and the medical establishment. Generally, what are the folks who are sort of the, the conventional orthopedics, I guess it's the American Orthopedics Association, what's their position on nutrition? Are we seeing any kind of movement? Do folks do orthopedics or orthopedists generally know anything about nutrition, and are they moving in that direction?
Well, yeah, the AOA, or there's the other name for it, the other organization, there is actually that organization, the AOA, but the AAOS is the American Academy of Orthopedic Surgeons. And they had an initiative, interesting you ask, about 2014, and it's a little meme, it's called Own the Bone, meaning we take care of bones, but if someone asks us about osteoporosis, someone asks us a simple question, how much vitamin D should I take each day? Do I need it? We orthopedists generally say, just ask your regular doctor, your primary care physician or rheumatologist, or look it up. So the answer is we try to own the bone, but by and large, we don't. And we don't know, we know about these inflammatory conditions, osteoarthritis, gout, and rheumatoid arthritis, but we really don't know. So they're moving, but they're moving slowly. And of the 200 or so courses that were going to be presented at the American Academy of Orthopedic Surgeons in March, which was canceled due to COVID-19, but they still had them on video online. Of the 200 plus courses, there was one about bone metabolism and vitamin D. So we're moving. I guess the problem is we're moving on the slow side. That's my
answer. Well, at least you're moving. That's a good thing.
Moving.
Okay, we got a lot of questions to get through.
Right.
Okay, in the Ditch Dairy for Stronger Bones article that you helped us craft, you were also quoted as saying, drinking milk will not make bones stronger, will not positively affect bone growth or prevent bone fractures or hasten fracture healing. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, if you look at the slide that was just put up, and we'll start with that, is that we just said calcium, milk is fortified with calcium. And by the way, so is orange juice. Okay, so again, we're talking about the delivery system. It's not that you don't need calcium. It's just that the question is, and again, we'll get into it in a little while, where you get your calcium from. So let's look at this chart real quickly. There's a chart of fractures on the left, on the y-axis, for 100,000 person years. And what you can see is that while calcium is important, once you pass a certain limit, it's not as important. And the sense is that you see here, the countries, the societies that drink more milk and calcium, but more calcium is not necessarily needed to prevent fractures after a certain number. So what I'm trying to say is more isn't better. And that's all this chart is trying to show. And again, milk is a delivery system for the calcium. And that's why I bring it up as there are other ways to get calcium, but you do not need as much calcium as you think. Again, just like we don't need as much protein as we think. So I hope that answers your question. I don't know if there's another part to that.
And this chart really makes it clear. It seems that the more you have, the more likely you're going to have bone fractures, as opposed to, which is the opposite of what most people think. It's remarkable.
Right.
Really remarkable.
And those are epidemiologic studies. So, but the answer is yes. There's also a Swedish study 10 years or so ago that also showed that people who drink 3 glasses of milk a day not only had worse problems with cardiovascular health, they had more fractures, not less. This was a Swedish study over 20 years. It's an epidemiologic study with a lot of people, with 100,000 people. I mean, the author is a man named Michelson. I mean, these things you can look up. We don't make these things up. Yes.
I think there's a link to that article, to that study in our article, right? I think you have shared that with us.
Yeah, I believe, yes, I think you're right. But back to the exact question you're asking, look, a young child, if they get appropriate calories, are going to heal their bone, and they're going to, and proper nutrition, and it's not from milk or necessarily even vitamin D and calcium. They'll get it enough from a balanced diet. It's not going to make their bones heal quicker. It's not going to make them grow faster or better. So that's why I said that. And I was trying to make a point, which I guess I did.
Great. Great. So I think it's time for a little bit of a deep dive here. We're going to learn, I know, the article, and you've talked already a lot about vitamin D and calcium, but let's separate them for a moment, and let's talk first about vitamin D.
Okay. Well, I'm going to talk about vitamin D. I just need you to know a few more things about this delivery system, if you don't mind, about milk, and then we're going to get into that. What you should also know about milk is that most human beings on this planet, out of infancy, because infants need milk and it's their mother's milk. So the milk we drink is milk, breast milk from a cow, and we're the only species to do that. But understand that we have an enzyme called lactase, which breaks down the sugar in milk called lactose, only in infancy. Less than half of the Caucasian population in this world has the lactase enzyme. In other words, you grow out of the enzyme. Less than 25% of the African population and less than 15% of the Asian population has it. So if you can drink milk as an adult, it's actually due to an enzyme mutation. So that's another reason why it's not a good delivery system for it. And it also has things like growth hormone, progesterone, and estrogen, because we have to remember that it's breast milk, and that's the hormones it has to feed the calf, to make them go from, as Dr. Clapper, I think, once said, quoting him again, make a calf go from 70 to 700 pounds in a year. It's full of cholesterol. It's full of fat. It's full of things to make you big, not necessarily strong, but big. Now, you want to talk about vitamin D? We can tell you this, that the #1 source of vitamin D is the sun. Now, it is true that if you live in northern reaches of the world, you're not going to get enough sunshine in January to fulfill your needs. But in the northern reaches of the world, in the summer months, and certainly, let's say, anywhere in the US, if you're in the sun for 10 minutes, you can certainly get enough vitamin D from the sun, because 90% of it is made through the skin. The rest can come from fortified orange juice, from nuts, and we'll put up a slide later about that. But that really is where you get vitamin D, from the sun. It's not from milk, per se. I mean, there's some there, but that's not where you should be getting it.
Right. It's amazing. The myths just are incredible, right?
Yes.
I guess it's a very, very strong dairy lobby that we've got.
Right. And by the way, just the one thing, Jody, on the dairy lobby. If you read an article, and whatever article you read about dairy and bones, or dairy and health and calcium, vitamin D, you have to be careful about the study and where it came from, and if it's funded by the NDC, which is the National Dairy Council. Because let's face it, if you fund something, you want them to get the answers you asked for. So you have to be careful what studies you look for. Okay,
Absolutely.
I just want to throw that in.
It's an issue everywhere. I mean, it's really across all issues with nutrition. We're seeing that everywhere, with the meat industry, the poultry industry, the sugar industry, and absolutely the dairy industry. It's so important. Who's paying for the science, quote unquote science? Right. It's really the China study. That's where Dr. Campbell talks a lot about that in the China study. It's overwhelming where the depth and the billions of dollars associated with folks giving us bad information. Anyway, All right, let's move to calcium. Tell us what it is about calcium that makes it so important for our diet, and what are your recommendations in terms of nutrition?
Okay, with calcium, let me say this, and actually it goes for vitamin D, because I want to keep this, simple, and it's not because people in this audience aren't bright, but it is not rocket science. I call it the rule of 1,000 milligrams. You get 1,000 milligrams somehow, mostly in diet, but also if you need a supplement, which we can talk about, in your diet per day. 1,000 milligrams of vitamin D, 1,000 milligrams of calcium is sufficient. Okay, so it's just an easy number to remember, because you'll read articles where they say, well, if you're breastfeeding, you need 1,200. If you're elderly, you need 1,400. I think you get caught in the weeds, and I think that's a problem. So just know that. Now, one other thing, vitamin D, I know I'm skipping around a little, but it's also measured in IU, or international units. So about 600 IU of vitamin D is 1,000 milligrams. But just stick with the rule of 1,000. Now, I said at the outset, cows don't make vitamin D. Here I go again. Cows don't make calcium. It comes from the plants and grass they eat. Okay, so the cow is the middleman. And of course, you need calcium for strong bones, but what people don't know is that you do need vitamin D to absorb it in the intestine. And also that things can block its absorption in the intestine. What can? Too much caffeine, too much alcohol. Ready for this? Too much protein, as studies have shown, can block absorption of calcium. Now, that's a whole other issue about protein, where people think we need tons of protein. It's not germane to this conversation.
I'm going to ask you about that in a little while, so hold on to that thought.
Fine, because that's a whole other thing. Now, we can get calcium in soy milk. It's the same as in tofu or almond milk, orange juice, spinach, edamame, bagels. I mean, bagels have it even. So you can get calcium. Oh, thank you for bringing that up. I remember we had this slide of these little emojis of, I don't know who decided the emojis, what a chickpea emoji looks like, but okay. And what you can see if you want to take a screenshot of this, anyone in the audience, is that there are these plant-based, as it says at the top, calcium sources. And we don't need milk to get it, because of all the negative things about it. And this is just one little guide to show you that.
Great. Were you done? I'm sorry. I didn't want to interrupt.
No. I mean, I could get into the weeds a little more. There's calcium citrate.
No, let's not do that. Let me ask you a quick, maybe this is relevant to what you were about to say. You mentioned supplements earlier. There's a lot of controversy around supplements, and certainly all supplements are not created equal.
Right.
What are your thoughts about supplements in terms of if people don't get enough nutrients from the food?
Well, specifically vitamin D and calcium, if you can get a test for vitamin D, many people who go for labs, more and more doctors are getting blood tests for testing for vitamin D, for example. And, in a yearly checkup. And if your vitamin D level is low, that means you either have to eat foods high in vitamin D or take a supplement. Now, a supplement is just that. It should be an addendum to the vitamins you're taking in your food. So if you need 1,000 milligrams, as I use that expression, that's the rule of 1,000. If you're eating 3 meals a day, you're eating vegetables and fruits, and you're eating what I guess we Americans would call an average normal diet, by default, you probably get half of that, 500 milligrams. Now, if you feel you want to take more, then it's okay to take supplements. Now, I know some plant-based doctors say, well, you can't take too much. It's not the natural form. But a small amount of supplements are okay to do. And in fact, you can get a kit that you say, well, my kid likes milk. How am I going to get little Johnny to get his vitamin D and calcium? Well, there are vitamin D gummy bears. In fact, I think the problem you have is keeping them away from them because they're just gummy bears. And you can get a 500 milligram gummy bear, give the child it 3 times a week. It's 15 cents a gummy bear, if you will, if you do the math, which I've done, and they can meet those goals. So between diet and getting a low-level supplement, you don't even have to take it every day if you eat what we'll call an average diet, you will get your vitamin D. You can always get it tested, though, too. So I hope that gives you the answer that I'm sort of a middle of the road on the supplements. Supplements are okay.
Yeah, well, I mean, for the most part, because supplements aren't regulated, and there's all kinds of issues connected to, be all kinds of issues connected to supplement. At a minimum, before you start taking a supplement, everybody should check in with their physician and make sure that.
I agree with you, because first of all, if you get a blood test that shows your vitamin D levels are fine, then you probably don't need vitamin D and may not need calcium. some of the there are brand names that might be maybe a little more expensive, but maybe a better way to go. There are nutritionists you can check with. There's a lot of Googling you could do, but there are good brand names of supplements. But you're right, you have to be careful about where you get your calcium supplements.
And for the most part, what I'm hearing you say is you don't need supplements. Get the nutrients from the food.
Correct.
But you go to the doctor and it turns out that one of your numbers are very low, and your doctor thinks it's worth the risk for you to take supplements, because supplements can be risky.
Right.
That this is something that's worth considering. Right. Okay. Super.
That's it. That's it in a nutshell. Correct.
Yeah. No, I mean, Dr. Greger's book talks about the number of people who die from supplements every year, and just because it's so unregulated. So you always want to think about that before you start taking anything that's not regulated. Right?
Well, that's true. And in fact, he has a video. He does many videos, and I'm going to plug him because I don't know him personally, but I think he's a great guy from what I know. Nutritionfacts.org. I mean, you have a question about nutrition, he'll just quote you the studies and give you the bottom line.
Yeah. So let's move to osteoporosis. A lot of questions coming in on that, but the question I had for you ahead of time is, what can you tell us about osteoporosis, and what are the ways that folks can prevent osteoporosis?
Well, osteoporosis is something, again, that we orthopedists push off to the internal medicine doctors, but we're the ones who deal with the end stage of osteoporosis, the fractures, okay? Especially the elderly with hip fractures. We see a lot of that as an issue. So osteoporosis means that the bones, the strength of the bone, the density of bone, it gets weaker as we get older. And that is the reason why vitamin D and calcium are important. So back to the rule of 1,000 milligrams, you may want to take 1,500 as an intake as you get older. But I don't want to give an individual plan to a person. I think this is just general rules. So what do you do to prevent osteoporosis? Well, sometimes with aging, people are going to get osteoporosis. The people who start with the least bone mass are going to end with the least bone mass. So a woman generally has less bone mass than a man, but she starts with less at a younger age, and she has less when she's older. So the vast majority of people who get fractures from osteoporosis are elderly and usually Caucasian females. Men have more bone. So that's just, and they end up with more bone. So what can you do to prevent it? Yes, vitamin D, calcium, we keep going back to that, but it's so important to be active. It's so important to work against gravity. You don't have to be a heavy weightlifter, but you have to do that. I'm going to give you one quick story about the NASA scientists. I'm sorry, the astronauts. Back in the early days of space exploration, the astronauts would come home, the Gemini astronauts, and it wasn't talked about because it wasn't really in the media, but they got something called disuse osteoporosis. They were in zero gravity for 3, 5, 10 days. And even after that short period of time, they could barely hold their muscles up against the weight of gravity. Like I'm lifting my arm would be very difficult. And if you took x-rays of the bones, their bones would look washed out. They'd be like they were getting disuse osteoporosis. So they've learned that now on the space station, there's certain anti-gravity exercises they do every day. They must do. It's not like, oh, it's time to do my exercise. I think I will miss it today. They can't miss it any more than they could miss certain meals or do anything else they do on that space station, because it's so important that if they're on that space station for 6 months, could you imagine what their bones would look like when they came back to Earth? They probably couldn't get off of bed. So exercise is very important to help keep osteoporosis at bay. It's one of the best things I could tell you besides a healthful diet.
Great, thank you. Now, there's something called osteoarthritis. Mm-hmm. How does that differ? What is that, and what can folks do? It sounds like an awful thing we should probably all want to avoid. What can we do to prevent it?
Yeah, well, osteoarthritis, the only thing it has in common with osteoporosis is that, orthopedists treat it, and the first couple letters are the same. Osteo means bone. Well, think of the word osteoporosis. Porous, it means weakening. So that's what osteoporosis. Osteoarthritis is a joint problem. Okay, so the arthro comes from the Greek word joint, and itis means inflammation. So osteoarthritis, or what we also just know is arthritis, is inflammation in the joint, which leads to the bones rubbing against one another because the cartilage is worn down, the shock absorber is worn down, and that leads to pain in the joints, usually the knee and the hip, but many people, especially who I treat, have it in the hands. So osteoarthritis or arthritis is the creaking, they call it the creaking of the bones, but obviously it's not the bones, it's where the bones meet in the joints, the bend of the knee, the bend of the hip. And that's due to inflammation, not necessarily can be helped with augmenting of vitamin D and calcium, but with good nutrition and anti-inflammatory foods. And again, we get back to milk. Milk is a very inflammatory food. Okay, it has a lot of antigens. Without going into the science of that, it's another species, antigens or proteins that we're digesting, and the body sees that as foreign, and we then send out our white cells to fight that, and that's where you get the word inflammation from. So again, even if milk as a delivery system only is okay for calcium and vitamin D, when it comes to arthritis or osteoarthritis, it is bad. Simply put, it is bad.
It's just so amazing, we're told that milk is so good for us. The doctors think it's good for us. I remember taking my son to this pediatrician and telling me, you must get 3 glasses of cow's milk into him every day. And it's just, the science is so far along here. It's just amazing that people still think this, and it's just really what you're doing and to try and help get that information out is so important, Dr. Weisman. And it's coming from a doctor is the most important piece, because people really do trust their doctors. Anyway, now that we've heard about osteoarthritis as well, what are some other common inflammatory conditions that are relevant to what we've been talking about that might have an impact from dairy or people giving up dairy?
Sure. Well, other inflammatory, there's something called rheumatoid arthritis. There's a genetic basis to that could be made worse by one's diet. Very common in our society, which shouldn't be, is gout. And gout is inflammation in the joint from crystals called uric acid crystals or urate. And people with gout have painful red, usually their toes, but also could be their knees. And it usually comes with eating inflammatory foods and foods high in a protein product called purines. And if you've ever seen pictures of the kings and queens in art museums from the 1400s, the big heavy families with big rosy cheeks, and I can't quote you the exact pictures, but the artist's depiction of these kings and queens with a big swollen red toe, and that's because these are the only people in the society who could afford to eat all those inflammatory foods and the pheasants and the game. And those are the people who got gout. And we have gout now. And I see patients who have gout all the time. And again, we orthopedists are not owning that. We're sending them away. We should at least know how many milligrams of a medicine to give to treat the acute phase. But to keep it at bay and to keep it away, it's about the food. We shouldn't be seeing gout. We just shouldn't be seeing it.
Amazing. And the amount of pain and suffering, just incredible. Exactly. We're running out of time, so I want to quickly get in 2 more questions. Okay. When we were in some of the planning stages of this webinar, I heard you say children are not small adults when it comes to bones and nutrition. Can you elaborate on that?
Yes, that's a general rule for any specialty in medicine. Children are not small adults in terms of how they heal. In terms of orthopedics, in terms of how their bones grow and develop and heal. I do not treat a broken, well, I shouldn't say exactly, I do not treat a broken wrist in a 5-year-old like I do in a 35-year-old. There's definitely crossover. To say it's completely different is not true, but it's only a crossover. They're not little people. Their bones are different. They're growing, they have different healing capacity. And so, in just a short statement is what I was trying to say is they're not small adults. And also, I guess their nutritional needs are different as well. But from an orthopedic standpoint, that's the best way I could explain it. They're different. And that's why there's actually in medicine a field of pediatric orthopedics. In fact, I'm sorry, a field of medicine is pediatrics. In orthopedics, there's a field of pediatric orthopedics. In fact, there's pediatric neurologists for that reason. There's pediatric psychiatrists. There's a reason for that, because in all fields of medicine, they're not the same.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Okay, so this is my favorite question. Can you talk about Kwashiorkor disease?
Okay. Yes, you told me you might ask me about that. Kwashiorkor, okay, was a term coined by a doctor, a Jamaican doctor named Dr. Cicely, I think it's Dr. Cicely Johnson. I want to get that right. In the 1930s. And basically what she saw in certain areas of the world which were malnourished, like in Ghana, that these children would get very sick for protein deficiency. And the word Kwashiorkor, which is Kwashiorkor, Kwashiorkor, protein deficiency, meant, it was a word in the language Ga, G-A, and the word meant sickness of the child when a new baby comes. Think about it. The child, there's only so much food to go around. So the preference would be for the new baby, which means the child would maybe no longer get fed. And that's where the word Kwashiorkor came from. It's a protein deficiency. And without going too far afield, please understand that in this society, we have deified protein as the be-all and end-all. Protein shakes and protein bars. We do not need all this protein. And it'd be a great webinar for a discussion for another webinar, but there's no case of Kwashiorkor. There's nobody in this society, even if they're eating not such a good diet of fast foods, has a protein deficiency. In fact, we only need about 5% of our calories each day coming from protein. So I was at a meeting, I think you were there, you heard the word, I mentioned Kwashiorkor in regard to proteins and protein deficiency. So I brought that up.
Yeah, so I'll just tell the quick story that we were at a meeting, and Dr. Weisman asked people to raise their hand if anyone ever heard of it. No one had ever heard of it. And he said that because it doesn't exist in this country. It's the deficiency of protein. And the punchline is not that we need so much protein. We certainly need protein, but we get plenty of it. But what we have is a huge issue with fiber in this country, right?
The huge issue is fiber. Right. And again, this is this is a great protein, as Dr. Garth Davis, who wrote Proteinaholic, wrote. It's a great book. You should read it if anyone's particularly interested in the whole protein myth. There's also a carbs myth. There's a whole carbohydrate myth.
Yeah.
The bottom line, and there's a whole sugar myth with diabetes. It's about fat you eat, not the sugar. But again, for another conversation, what it is about is plant foods and fiber. Fiber, and ask any of the experts. That's what they'll tell you.
That's great. Okay, so now I'm going to turn this over to the PPC team, who have been collecting questions from registration, although some of our questions also came from registration, but some of the later registrations, and also from the chat and from the Facebook Live. So take it away.
Thank you. Thanks so much. This has been so informative. So our first question has come in from John from California. He asks, what are the main myths when it comes to dairy, calcium, and bone health?
Okay, my first answer to the question was that hopefully John asked that question before the talk, because some of it was answered. I would hate to think that he's asking it and we got nothing from the talk thus far. But the myths are that you need milk and cheese to get your calcium, that it's the only place to get your calcium. There's also a myth that, I'll tell you a quick story, that I was once at a dinner party and I said, well, milk is cow's milk from breastfeeding cow. And this person said, it was a woman, she says, what do you mean? I said, cows give milk. I said, no. Breastfeeding cows give milk. Otherwise, cows don't give milk. So the idea that cows just don't make milk any more than a human woman makes milk, except under certain circumstances. And with it comes the estrogens and the progesterone, and the growth hormones, which is good for a child, for an infant, but not for an adult. So that's, to me, the whole myth about what milk is and what it does for someone really has to be broken. I hope I answered that one. Did we lose Did we lose
Great.
Caroline?
Thank you.
Okay, good, you're there. Okay.
Yeah, Jesse was just putting back up this picture for people.
Okay. Oh, the sources. Thank you. Yes.
Great sources of calcium. So another question, once a person has osteoporosis and changes their diet, what can be done to mitigate the damage already done?
Well, just like a person's been smoking for a long period of time and they stop smoking, there is some damage to the lungs, but the sooner they stop and the longer they've stopped for, the more chance the body has to heal. What you do have to know is that this human body can heal, okay? There's, with rare exception, with unusual diseases like a bone disease called osteogenesis imperfecta, which is a rare genetic disorder where you break your bones all the time as a child. Everyone in this conversation, or at least hopefully who's listening, has normal bones and can heal things. So I hope that answered the question, that what you can do for it is stop the bad stuff, start the good stuff, meaning exercise and eat plant-based, and you will see, and if you need the supplements of calcium, vitamin D in the appropriate amounts, you can build bone. Just like, by the way, the astronauts, who I told you had something called disuse osteoporosis, and also people who are in a leg cast for a long time, their bone heals, but you take an x-ray and the bone looks osteoporotic because they haven't been putting weight on it for 6 or 8 or 10 weeks. They can build back the bone once that bone heals. Or the astronaut, once they get back to Earth and they start moving and exercising and maybe lifting weights, their bone health, just like their muscle strength, just like your muscles can get stronger, your bones can too. And that's about some exercise. So I hope that answers that question.
Excellent. Will this change, meaning consuming a plant-based diet, help people who are already experiencing bone loss and on medication for osteoporosis? And I think you kind of just summarized that a bit, but maybe for those specific conditions.
Well, I think it could help for everything. I mean, the studies are there. Yes, I'm going to say in a word, yes. And what it certainly can help, and it's not my field of expertise, but read anything by Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn, Dr. Dean Ornish, who essentially took, again, it's important, but I'm a little off the topic, who took what we call cardiac cripples, people whose heart surgeon said, you don't have good enough arteries to even get up. You'll die in surgery. He took those very sick people and with this kind of diet, turned them around. So the answer is yes, your osteoporosis can improve with a proper nutrition and proper diet. And you don't need to drink milk or eat cheese because that's inflammatory. It's not the right delivery system. And that's what I'm trying to hammer home, if you will.
Great, thank you, Dr. Weisman. So our next question here is about plant-based milks. Which plant-based milk is best for women to prevent bone loss, and what about for absorption? And I would assume they're referring to calcium absorption.
Well, calcium and, right, vitamin D and calcium. I would say you can look and see how much fortification is in, and I don't want to tell you about a particular brand. There are a lot of good brands out there of soy milk, almond milk, macadamia milk. You can look at the ingredients and see how much fortification there is with calcium and vitamin D. I think the idea is, and some have vanilla in them, I think the idea is find the one that tastes good, okay? Because at the end of the day, if people don't find joy in eating the food, then they're not going to stick with it. And you know, because again, getting slightly off the track, that's what people ask me. Well, I don't understand you. You don't eat hamburgers. Aren't you missing out? I said, no, I feel too good. And by the way, now we have plant-based burgers that taste like hamburgers. So again, I'm off the trail, but I think you have to find the almond milk or the macadamia milk or the cashew milk, what you like. Look at the ingredients, because I don't think it's a particular one that makes a difference, a better difference.
Great, thank you. And so our next question has to do with the spine. How can you make and keep your spine healthy?
Well, it comes back again to weight-bearing activities. And unfortunately, frail, and I'll have to say it, you know, when you get older, usually I've seen this disease, if you will, called the vertebral fracture, where the bones of the spine can literally, they look like a rectangle and they actually collapse like a little bit like a flat, like you will a flat tire, to use that metaphor. Again, because those bones are osteoporotic. And the key is besides a good diet, the key is movement, okay? And at any age, they've done studies in nursing homes where they've gotten some of the population who can get up and out of a wheelchair just to hold a 1 pound weight 5 times up and down every day, or walk up and down the corridor. After a month, those people walk better, and although it's hard to measure bone strength in a month, they were overall more functional and doing better. So again, it comes down to healthy lifestyle.
Great, thank you. Another question, if someone wants to build their bones with resistance training, but every time they exercise with weights, they end up with joint pain, do you have any suggestions on how to strengthen joints?
Well, a joint can't be strengthened in the sense that it's not a muscle that can grow. You're trying to prevent the pain from a joint. Remember, joint is between the bones where they hinge, the knee, for example, the thigh bone and the leg bone. In between where they hinge is the knee joint. So you can't make the knee stronger. What you can do, especially for knee arthritis, knee joint arthritis, is the more weight you carry, the more pain you'll have. And as far as weight resistance, yes, there's a certain curve where you have to build up your ability to lift weights. But what's important is to start small. Sometimes you don't have to lift a weight. Especially if you're starting out, you can lift an empty suitcase 5 times. People who have the inclination and maybe can afford it, they talk to a trainer, a personal trainer, or go to group classes, someone who's certified, and for an individual can teach them and show them how to build their bones up, or I'm sorry, build their muscles up with resistance exercises gradually and slowly, because the key is gradually and slowly so you don't hurt your joints. So that's a great question. It can be done, but it has to be done incrementally. Any more than you say, well, how am I going to go run a marathon? Well, if I've never run before, you don't say to them, go out and just go run 26 miles. No, you start by running 1 mile, and then you build up.
Makes sense. Thank you. And then we had a follow-up question. Jess has asked, does swimming count as good exercise for building bones?
Sure, it's exercise. There's now people can say, well, you're in the water, it's buoyant, are you getting the resistance? And the truth is, there's still plenty of resistance in swimming against the resistance of the water. So it's exercise. It's still weight, but you're still going. You might be going across a pool or a lake, but you're still going in gravity, of course. And it's a great exercise. In fact, some would say that it helps build strength and stamina without the pounding of running against a hard pavement. So some would argue that's the best way to get exercise if you have access.
Great. And what tips do you have for talking to people about making the change to non-dairy milk?
Oh, the tips, you've got to try it. And like everything else, it's an acquired taste. I mean, I get it. If you like the creamy taste of half and half, it's a long way to drinking a coffee black. I can tell you from personal experience, that was my road. I stopped dairy years ago, and I liked my half and half in the coffee. And then I went to almond milk because I said I can't drink it black. And now it's the only way I drink it. And the truth is, the only problem is I guess I become a coffee snob, because if you're going to drink coffee black, as I enjoy it, it has to be good coffee. Otherwise, you have to doctor it up with a lot of things like creamy milk. But I think it's a phase. You have to be willing to try something new, okay? And that's my only answer. You graduate and your taste buds change. I hope that answers that one.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it's definitely the experience I had when transitioning to plant-based milks. Just experiment and try things. And yeah, maybe for me personally, I changed the tea that I drank every day because it just did not work with the plant-based milk that I liked the most. So I found a different tea that I liked, and it's great. Now I enjoy it every morning. So I think this is the last question we can take from the audience. Does metabolizing dairy create a negative calcium balance?
Well, there's some studies, it's acidic. So there are some studies out there. I think this is what the questioner is referring to. that because it makes your pH, the balance of the acid, acid base in your body, more acidic, does the calcium in your bones, your body's very smart. It says, wait, there's a problem here. I'm going to get rid of the calcium. That's where it's stored. Get it out of the bones and into the bloodstream, because it will neutralize the acid. And of course, if it goes out of the bones, what happens? You get weak bones or osteoporosis. There's some studies, there's some contradicting studies. So it's hard to say that that's the reason it actually would cause osteoporosis. I want to be very careful about not saying things that are still, we'll use the word controversial or not, we're unsure of. But like I said, the body is a healing machine. It's smart. One of the reasons you get that, to go back to the disuse osteoporosis, is, well, if you're not using it, if you're an astronaut, you don't have to force your bones against gravity. Your body says, you know what? I like this calcium store. I need this calcium for other things, and it's going to leach out of the bones, because obviously your bones don't need it. So we have to listen to the bottom line is you have to listen to your body. The body's very smart. You just got to help it along.
That's great. I have to tell you, after listening to this webinar and being part of it, my anger at the dairy industry has multiplied. It's just so infuriating. I was quite advanced years by the time I started to understand this, and I wish I had learned this earlier when my kids were younger. But it just comes from such a place of anger at this point for me. So that's why it's so important to share this information. So. With that, let me just do a couple of wrap-up remarks. First of all, Dr. Weisman, thank you so much. From everybody, we've gotten some incredible comments. People are so appreciative of your giving us your time and your wisdom, your hands-on, no pun intended, hands-on experience. So thank you. A special thanks to you, and we hope you'll join us on future webinars. I'm sure people are going to love to have you come back again.
Be my pleasure.
Did you want to say anything else before we do some finals?
Well, I think, no, I pretty much wrapped it up. I mean, I think what I'll leave you with is that we do need vitamin D. We do need calcium. It's a matter of how much and the delivery system. Just like we need protein, but not as much as we think we do. But I'll leave that as maybe as a teaser for another webinar.
It's great, keeping it simple, right? That's the key, because there's so much to think about here, and then you get bombarded with so much other information. So making it as simple, boiling it down is pretty crucial.
Right.
Okay, so a couple of last remarks. I just want a special thank you to the PPC team who have been working crazy hours between our announcement last night with Dr. Clapper and then today's webinar, and then we're having another webinar on Thursday. Folks, this is another with Dr. I always say her name wrong, Saray Stancic. She is an infectious disease specialist, and she was the producer of the film that just came out called Code Blue. And I have never met her before, so I'm really looking forward to hearing what she has to say. This will be, again, all part of our lead up to our Global Jumpstart, which we hope, if you haven't already signed up for, we hope you will look into signing up for that, everybody who's listening. And the other last item is just, as Dr. Weisman had mentioned earlier in the session, the Moving Medicine Forward Master Class, registration is open for that as well. And it's very popular. We're happy to see that. It's going to be an extraordinary thing. And so folks who are interested in signing up for that, registration is just open. So you can go to PlantPure Communities, our website, and you can look at campaigns, and you'll see the Dr. Clapper Moving Medicine Forward initiative there if you want to look into registering on that. And then on the Global Jumpstart, you can also go to our website. So it's exactly 2 o'clock. We promised we would be finished on time. And so we wish you all a lovely day, and don't drink your milk, but enjoy all your almond milk and your cashew milk and all the other kinds. So thank you all for joining us, and have a good day.
Thanks again for having me. I appreciate everyone's work too, for getting this together. Thank you.